by way of introduction. Nebraska law requires that new superintendents be evaluated twice in their first year. As such, the board gave Dr. Gosman a goal of, quote, by November 22nd, 2022, present a mid-year transition report to the board, including preliminary findings, emerging themes, and potential recommendations based on input from internal and external stakeholders, unquote. Dr. Gosman has prepared and will now present that report. I remind all of us that this report includes those preliminary findings, emerging themes, and potential recommendations, but does not include finalized recommendations for action at this time. This report will simply touch base on where he is in the process of transitioning into the district, and final findings, themes, and recommendations will, of course, come as part of the end of this process in April. So with that, I would like to recognize Dr. Gosman.
Thank you very much, and good evening, board. It is very surreal to stand down here. I think the last time I was down here with a clicker in my hand was an interview. So this is very different, but I have had just a wonderful time learning, coming into the community of Lincoln and, of course, the organization of the Lincoln Public Schools. And as was just articulated, I was charged with giving this mid-year transition report, so I'm just going to go through that, what I have learned at this time, and make certain that you have a clear understanding of what I'm learning thus far. As I move forward, let's forward the slide if you don't mind. It looks like it's being stubborn. Yeah. It's okay. I'm used to this. There we go. Try it again. There we go. I want to remind you, board, that the transition plan that we agreed to is one that's got research behind it, but it's not incredibly scientific research. It's what I'm referring to as quasi-qualitative research. And what I mean by that is that the findings aren't random, in that I just went out to anywhere in the community to find them. We had some prescribed organizations and people and such that I would meet with and interview. And so they're not random, but I also want to point out the conclusions are not absolute. I think it's very important to note that this evening, that people even watching this online or in the room this evening may hear a finding and say, well, I'm not sure I agree with that, and that's okay. It's simply a finding at this time, and so it's born from conversation. I want to point out that process matters, and I'm going through a process, and I'm only partway through that process. And I worry that when I present some findings, somebody might think that I'm somehow challenging the long history of success that LPS has engaged in, and I certainly don't mean to do that. I don't mean to undercut any previous work, and obviously LPS is very successful. Just asking people to consider the findings for what they are. They're findings that I have heard. I note that some of them might be real findings, and yes, that's accurate. That's something we really need to work on. Or maybe it's a perceived finding where simply I've heard out in the community that this certain situation exists, but I happen to know because I'm inside the district that's not how it really is. What that means to me is that we've got to do a better job of marketing and communicating with our community about the finding that is there. We don't necessarily have to change the structural nature of it. And so I just want us all to embrace the findings, just to shine a light on status quo, because sooner or later, and I don't think it's going to be much later, I'm going to become part of that. I'm new to the district still. And so I've got an outside set of eyes at this time, and I'm still taking a look at what's there. I want to note to you that levels of perspective are in play. I am not getting down to the tactical perspective here at all in my findings. You think of organizations running on strategic thought, and then they tend to operationalize those strategies. Then they tend to put tactics under those operations. Tonight, I'm not talking about operations or tactics at all, just strategies. Another way to look at it would be to consider that I'm presenting to you a bunch of concepts tonight on this midpoint. I am not giving you the context behind those concepts. That context will have to be built with our experts, not just me in a room, but with our experts coming together to build that context. I just remind you that in the transition plan that you approved, there was process objective number 1, which was to transition into the superintendent leadership while learning about the details with the strategic plan and initiatives and programs and groups and the communities that make up our school district as well as the community itself. My second objective, there were only 2 there, was to develop relationships as a part of this work with our stakeholders inside and outside of the district while listening to their perspectives regarding challenges and items of celebration in Lincoln and the Lincoln Public Schools. And as you know, we have many of both. We have things we can get better, but we have a lot of things to celebrate as well. Another visual representation of the fact that I'm just at the mid-year report now. The board has charged me with a final report at the more close to the end of this school year. It says there April 25th of 2023, and I'll do that work. But tonight we're just at that mid-year report status. I gained feedback for this report to you from internal stakeholder groups, and some of those outlined in these categories. Of course, you as the Board of Education, we did a retreat together, and you've continued to advise me as we've moved through this work together. The executive leadership team of this district, I believe, is second to none, and they have done a great job of helping to advise me and counsel me to make sure that my transition into the district didn't cause any undue stress, although occasionally that happens. But they've done just a wonderful job. The school administrative teams, good partnerships with the associations and union leaders throughout the district, as we have multiple unions that we work with. The certified staff groups, the classified staff groups. It's really important that school districts not overlook the most important group they could talk to who could give feedback, which is the student groups. We need to hear from our students about the real experience that they receive when they go through our schools. And of course, we've got a lot of partners and providers. Also, as you know, I've engaged with a lot of external stakeholder groups. These are groups that are partners to the district and certainly support the work that we do, but they're not necessarily part of the district proper. Those groups would include community groups, cultural groups, mayor, local political leaders. They've been so great to work with. Post-secondary leaders. We've got so much in this education community, not just with the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, which is wonderful, but with Wesleyan, with Southeast Community College, one of our biggest partners. Certainly around the area and region with Doane and so on. And so we want to learn from them as well. The Chamber is an important group, as you know, and the Independent Business Association, just different businesses as well. The United Way that we just spoke about and celebrated. And of course, all of the support agencies that not only are funded and partner with the United Way, but many that exist even outside of the United Way. And then of course, you as the board and the executive committee, I asked you all to identify 5 or 6 or 7 leaders that you would like me to visit with individually, and I did that work. And it was interesting because the lists did not overlap as much as I thought they would. Your list of 6 or 7 leaders was different than someone else's list of 6 or 7 leaders. Very little overlap there, and so I really did feel like I got a diverse series of perspectives from those groups. Just want to also acknowledge that I had the opportunity to meet with some statewide leaders specific to education, and I've outlined those on this slide. Of course, senators, the Department of Education, and the commissioner there, at least through the start of the new year. The Department of Education staff, the chair of the State Board of Education had good conversations. And then what I refer to as membership groups and the leaders of those membership groups, like the Nebraska Council of School Administrators, the Nebraska Association of School Boards, Greater Nebraska Schools, those sorts of groups as well. And in just about every time I've had the opportunity to give a public speech, especially one where I could follow up with an email, whether it's our staff members, internal groups, external groups, I've followed up with them with a 3-question survey and asked them if they would please give me some feedback, even if they didn't wish to give me their name, if they just wanted to give me the information from their own perspective. And I really asked these 3 questions. And you've heard me refer to them often enough, but I'm going to state them again just in case somebody watching wasn't a part of any of those conversations. But the first question I was regularly asking was something to the effect of, what are some of the successes in Lincoln that have instilled a sense of pride in you or in the community about the school district? What is going well here? I continually point out that this district performs very much like a suburban district, even though Lincoln has purposefully and rightfully retained the urban core. And so we are a district that is not an urban district, not a suburban district. We're us. And yet we perform better than some might expect demographically. And I'm asking, what's that secret sauce that helps us to do that in this district? The second question is kind of the opposite of that, which is at this time, I think as superintendent of schools, part of my role is to get items out of people's way so they can be more effective in their job. And so my role is to understand what we could add, what we could delete, what we could change, what we could improve. And so I asked that as kind of a second question. And then a third question I often ask in front of community groups is, if you were the superintendent of schools, separate from going out and just meeting people and learning names and organizations, what would you do first? What do you think the highest priorities should be? And so the next few slides, I'm going to answer these three questions, but I'm not answering them with Paul Gosman's perspective. I'm answering them with the perspective I learned from engaging with all those aforementioned groups. The goals in this report to you simply develop relationships, to articulate the common themes that I heard, whether real or perceived, they're common themes that I heard, to identify some short-term needs, some long-term goals, to represent the perspectives of all that it involved. And I really do have in excess of 1,000 points of data here that I tried to code so that I would make sure that everything that was heard in the categories were right. And I present that to you coming soon. And of course, I want to represent the learning that I have engaged in to you and to our community in a way that I hope helps our district move forward. So as I go to that first question, what's the secret sauce? What are some of the special things that make Lincoln so unique and so successful? Here are some common responses that I heard, most common responses. Number one, this district and the community put kids first. The community supports this district. I heard this over and over again. Whether people have kids in school or not, they support the district. Even if families have students that are in the private school system, the parochial school system, or choose to homeschool, they seem to understand and value in this community that the public schools must be strong. And that's significant. I have not seen that same level of support in some other communities where I have served. The third bullet down is that this district has at least put effort into equity in facilities, supports, and staff in all parts of the district. As you know, we tend to dole out more points for staff, as an example, when it's a building, as an example, that would have higher poverty. Or if you take a look at our newest high school, Lincoln Northwest, and soon to be Standing Bear that we talked about, and compare that to Lincoln High, of course, they're built in different centuries. We have to remember that. They're built in different centuries. But the student experience is much the same in the sense that they have the same technology, the same resources, and staffing protocol. I thought that was interesting that a number of people acknowledged and recognized that. School choice was bullet number 4, and that one's interesting to me because I hear a lot of talk in the legislature about school choice. And yet one of the things that people seem to value here is that we already have an incredible myriad of choices for our students. As you know, they can attend multiple schools, the school that suits them best. We have all kinds of, like when they move into high school, focus programs and career pathways, those sorts of things. And that school choice is alive and well in Lincoln. Without any new legislation, school choice is alive and well. I heard frequently that people in this community, and this one was rare to me because you don't normally hear this. Normally when you're asking people what's going well and what could be better, what you hear on the what could be better side is communication. You can do a better job of communicating with us. I was surprised to learn, but not really because I know the department pretty well now. People in this community feel proud of the content creation and the communication, especially through the pandemic, that came out of this district to keep people informed about what was going to happen next. I'm not saying communication that everybody always agrees with, but that communication is regular and thorough. And I have to tell you, in 7 other districts in which I've worked, I've always felt like we did a good job with communication. Could get better, but we always did a good job. I have seen communication here that's just at a completely different level and a higher level. Really impressed with how that's done. The last one I want to just explain for a moment, which is about autonomy. I don't use the word autonomy here, but it's the last bullet on this slide. It appears that as school districts grow, they become more bureaucratic, and that's just natural. But people in this district seem to appreciate that they're given autonomy to lead within the bureaucracy so long as their department or their building is meeting metrics that are agreed upon. And I think we just need to do more and more of this over time. It's not important that every building get to the same result in the same way. They might have a different student population, a different schedule, different transportation needs, whatever it might be. But what I learned from listening to folks about this secret sauce is that they do appreciate when we give them metrics and then let them lead the way, partner together and lead the way towards success. And of course, if metrics are not achieved, we've got all kinds of supports that can come in and help a building or a department move forward. But there's this general agreement about metric-driven leadership, and so I just wanted to explain that a little bit. Other common responses on the secret sauce. By the way, I wanted to point out to you that none of these are in any priority order. They're not listed first because they had more responses or anything like that. I just pulled the ones that I felt were the most common. And the quality of staff came up often, even by groups that weren't representative of our staff. They would say that they were really proud of our staff members. The professional development, that came up a lot from our staff members, that when we provide professional development, whether at the building level or district, they appreciate that a great deal. There appears to be a great deal of confidence in this district that they can do their jobs. I know we're in a stressful time. I want to be clear to any staff members that are listening. We are in probably the most stressful time in American public school history with staffing buildings. When you consider coming out of the pandemic and the fact that there's a workforce shortage in every line of work right now, it's not just education. And they're working through some really challenging times, but they still have confidence that they can make a difference in each child's life, and that efficacy matters. And not just our teaching staff or our administrative staff. That last bullet there, the sub-bullet, is that our support staff are strong across the board. Our paras, our drivers, our custodial staff, our operations teams. I don't want to miss any. Food services often mentioned. We have so many good support staff members. The next significant bullet, the second full bullet there, is that partnerships make excellence. One of the things you've heard me say in board meetings before is that whenever I learn about something really cool that's happening in the Lincoln Public Schools, I'm not surprised. But I always seem to acknowledge that it's in partnership with some other agency, program, community entity. And when we do things with other agencies, we're better. And so I think that's something we need to make certain we hang on to. Board members, I heard when you weren't in the room that people in this community are proud of our board. And that was a common theme. I know it may appear as though I'm just playing to the crowd tonight, but this was a common theme, or I would not have put it on there. That students are at the center of your decisions, and not everybody's always going to agree with your decisions, and that's okay because we pay you so well for your board service. But one of the things that I heard more than once, and so I just want to point it out, by the way, anybody that just heard that comment, board members volunteer to serve in this role. I want to be clear about that. Is that notion of 4-3 and 7-0, that, yeah, we might have a 5-2 vote. We might have a 6-1 vote. We might have a 4-3 vote. But once we've voted, that's a 7-0 decision, and we're going to move forward together. And I've witnessed that here in the short time I've been here, different than I've seen in a lot of other districts, and I think you should be proud of that. And then just the notion that this district exists to develop and maintain the notion that we're all lifelong learners. That came out in these conversations, and that's our role. And I thought that was interesting as well. So when you go to the second question, which is what can we change? What can we remove? What should we add? What kind of common themes should we focus upon as we work to move forward together? I starred the common themes, and then I put a number of bullets under each one of those starred common themes. Actually, Laura starred them, I believe. She helped me a lot with this. The human resources supports was a very common theme that I heard. I just mentioned we're in one of the toughest times in history as it relates to human resources. And it appears to be that our community, particularly our internal community, thinks we can do even more if we can bolster our human resources department. That's not a criticism of our leadership in HR or any of the team members in HR. It's simply we need to give them more supports and help. And so I think that's a theme we're going to continue to hear. But some of the sub-bullets under there were conversations about whether we should place full-time substitute teachers or substitute paras in each building so that they could just be called on each day, because you know that in a larger building, frankly, even in some of our smaller buildings right now, they need at least one sub a day. And should we be considering full-time staff members who are full-time subs? Hiring processes that help bring new candidates into LPS. This often goes along with people pointing out that our staff population doesn't mirror our student population demographically. And so that came up. We've got to do more to retain our staff. Staff members who are out there, the second half of that I'm speaking to tonight, I kept hearing that we ought to do, we're doing interviews to bring new people to the district. But if we ever thought about just stopping and interviewing those who are already here and saying, hey, you're within 5 years of being eligible for retirement, what's it going to take to keep you? What can we do to make you feel secure and fulfilled and safe and all of those things to be successful? And part of that, and a sub-bullet under that, was to refocus our work on staff appraisal or evaluation for growth and retention of the expertise. There's this worry out there right now, and I share it, that a whole lot of our expertise could go at any time, and then we're bringing in all of this new, and sometimes that's exciting, and there's new training and those sorts of things. You do not want that expertise walking out the door any sooner than it has to, And so a lot of talk about grow your own, meaning that we're growing our own leaders. We have to acknowledge that many of our future employees are in our classrooms. They were in them today, and we've got to work, and that'll help us with diversity and with leadership. There were numerous suggestions, and I know the board has done this already, but I think we might want to dig just a little bit deeper on it, just a theme for tonight, which is to review our classified staff member pay, not certified staff, but classified staff member pay, and consider market rates. I heard a number of times, whether true or not, that we have some classified positions that are still out of market. They could make more money working at a Target or Amigos than they could in their classified position. And I think we just need to review that again and make sure that we're within the market, because we all know the market has changed significantly through the pandemic. Getting more supports for the HR staff was mentioned there, and so I'm pointing that out again. And then, of course, we need to make sure that we have staff supports for mental wellness. And you know this. I know this. We have a lot of resources for our staff. But when I heard this come forward as a theme, I thought, I wonder if we're not marketing it enough to our staff so that they've got those numbers and those context right at their fingertips. Just something to consider. A second common theme was that we've got to do more for equity education in this district. And I know you're already doing a ton of it. I'm so proud of what you've done with the All Means All action plan. And I think if we embed that into our new strategic plan when we get there, I think it'll be a very wise move. But it is a hot topic in this district right now. Look at the first sub-bullet under equity education. That we've got to do more to continue to grow in our understanding, not just of race, but of ethnicities and cultures. Because we've got family members and students from all over the globe coming right now. And so we've got to look well beyond, and it's important that, the civil rights issue of race in this country is obviously still front and center. But we've got to make certain that we're digging even deeper into ethnicities and cultures. We've got to consider poverty as a marginalized population. And that came forward in these themes. Connectivity, and we're doing a lot with this right now. The community just doesn't know it yet. We've got some partnerships coming forward that I think are going to allow our students and families access to the internet in better ways. And so I'm praising that work that's being done behind the scenes, but they're ready for it, as I learned in this common theme. To review our transportation and just make certain that we're providing transportation for marginalized populations at an equitable level. Service to adult communities, and obviously money and time are always a challenge here, but are we doing enough to serve those new to our community from other places on the globe? Not only the students, but the family members as well. And of course, to prioritize that All Means All work that strengthens grades 5 to 6 and grades 8 to 9 transitions for those who are new to our culture. And we've done a lot of that this year, but it hasn't been fully realized yet. And so I was thankful that the All Means All action plan actually has us focusing on that, because I'm still hearing that we need to do it and that it needs to have a bigger impact. Probably the most frequently heard item was the last star on this slide, which was continue to expand early childhood education. And again, I want to point out, I'm going to just say these words a few times tonight. I'm here tonight to share with you some concepts. I am not giving you context. I am here to talk to you about the strategy of expanding early childhood education. I'm not ready, nor is our team, to present you with the operational and tactical details of how we would do that, other than I continually heard that we've got to do more with partners. And so that's an area I think we're going to need to look at together, but how we look at it will include our staff members. The next item was also frequently mentioned, which is that we've got to do more with our partnerships with the legislature, the State Board of Ed, and local entities. There were a lot of comments made that, when they hear the legislature talk about schooling as an example, and they're going to talk about education reform or funding reform for schools or those sorts of things. And you know, we're all fortunate that people volunteer to serve. And so I don't mean to disparage any of them. But they hear them say things that don't necessarily match what these people know is going on in our buildings. And so we've got to do a better job, I think, this theme says, of educating and communicating with our legislators, with the State Board of Ed, about what's going on in our schools. You know, schools over the years, in the last 20 years, 25 years, have become less welcoming. That's just part of school security. That means that we aren't allowing people to just wander into the building like we once did. And we have to remember there are more people in town who don't have kids in school than there are who do have kids in school. So the vast majority of our community doesn't actually come through our schools unless there's an absolute event that they would go to. It's probably the same with our legislators. And so we've got to do more to educate and communicate with them. Another extremely common thing I heard, and mostly internally, although some external groups as well, was that we need to do more for student behavior supports. And let me explain that with these bullets. We've got to do more with the culture and climate of learning and the positive behaviors that are needed for learning. We've got to expand and strengthen our social media and digital citizenship. Now, some of this is going to be a community initiative because the schools can only go so far. But I did hear as a common theme that students are really having challenges engaging on social media. And that's a place where a lot of things start and then they make their way into the school building and becomes the school's problem. So that's something we want to talk about a bit. Mental health supports is mentioned frequently. Socialization of students coming out of the pandemic. If you think about it, our third graders this year really haven't had a regular year of school, ever. I mean, because the pandemic, right? Our eighth graders didn't have a regular year of middle school until this year, if you call this year regular, right? And so we've got work to do to help them in that interpersonal, intrapersonal, and socialization coming out of the pandemic. We've got to do more, I think, to educate our communities on the programs that we have for student-based bullying. We've got a lot of policy and programs there, but I heard about student bullying, and so I think that's something we've got work to do. And then I also want to acknowledge that it's really common, the people who have their kids involved, or the kids who are involved in activities, arts, and athletics, they tend to have far fewer behavior challenges and perform better academically. If we can do more for more engagement, I think we're going to help solve this particular challenge. And so that's why I've got that listed on there as well. I think this is the last one on the common themes here. More communication and focus on our current high school offerings. Excuse me, there may be one more. But we've got the 8, James, you're here somewhere, the 18 career pathways, the 7, 9 focus.
9 big areas and then about 25 if you add in TCA.
Okay, so if you add in TCA, you're at that 25. We've got these pathways, we've got these focus programs, and if I were even to ask you, or anyone working in the district, and certainly community members, which ones have college credit? Which ones have a certificate affixed to them? Who can go to them? How do you get there? Is transportation provided? There's a lot of people who celebrate the TCA. A lot of people celebrate the focus programs, but they don't know the inner workings and the details there. So I'm not suggesting that we necessarily change this. I'm saying we need to package it and market it a little different based on what I think I heard as a preliminary finding. And of course, we want all of our students to leave this district with a diploma and a plan for their future. A plan that will change, but it'll be a plan for their future. And then it was interesting because I heard this as an item of success, but I'm also hearing as an item of for the future, let's not overdo it here. Let's consider where we should be a bureaucracy and where we can allow our staff members autonomy. Let me give you an example. Third grade. We're going to teach third graders across this district. Is it important that we have the same pacing in every one of our 150 third grade classrooms, probably 150, 175 third grade classrooms? Is it important that we have the same pacing? Well, some would say yes, some would say no, but remember this, we are a highly mobile population. We've got kids not leaving town, but leaving this building and going to that building. They're in third grade over here this month. They're going to be in third grade over there that month. We have to be bureaucratic in certain areas to make sure that we're serving the students, but we do have to recognize that our staff members are experts and artists that use science to inform their art, and they can best move students forward where they've got some flexibility and autonomy. This is a hard line to walk, one we're going to have to talk about. And of course, I put on there as the last item, especially in recognition of coming out of the pandemic, staff workload. This is a challenging time to be in education, and our staff are doing a miraculous job of that. But we need to do all we can to support them. The highest priorities that we have for, did I miss a slide in there? I feel like I missed one. How do I go back?
Bottom button.
Okay. No, I think I got it. Okay, I apologize. I just wanted to make sure I didn't miss something. Thank you for the tutorial on the clicker. The highest priority. So this is that last question. What would you do first? What do you think our focus should be right now as we work together? And what came out were items like human resources supports, retention and recruitment, early childhood, partnerships and growth, high school offerings. Again, maybe not changing our high school offerings, but packaging and marketing those. Strategic planning, and of course the blend of the All Means All action plan. And that work we've got to do with our unicameral, with the county board, with the city council, with those elected officials, to understand what we're trying to do, have them understand how they can help us achieve those things, and what really is happening in our schools. So these were the 6 highest priorities that came forward. And board members, you asked me for one other thing, and that was the last part of that board goal. And so this is the last slide before I would take some feedback from you. But I want to be clear this evening. I'm just simply presenting to you some findings. And tonight I'm simply saying, here's what I heard. And over time, we're going to move forward, maybe building some context under some of those concepts that I reported to you tonight. Probably don't have a lot of detail to answer questions tonight, but I will take your feedback when we get there to make certain that I know those topical areas you want us to focus on as well. You asked me to suggest at this time, and I don't want to cause too much strife on the internal staff, that, hey, by tomorrow morning, everything's going to change, because that's certainly not what I'm talking about here. But as we move forward together, and in partnership with our experts, because I'm not going to do this in a vacuum, I'd include them, what would we do to strengthen even our work positionally and departmentally? And so number one, you've heard me say it twice already, so I'll just acknowledge that first bullet again, the human resources support. I believe it's about time for us to get some more support positions in the HR department so that they can do more to bring more employees and more substitutes into this district. I think that's a solution that will help every staff member, not just the HR department. And of course, we've got to focus on retaining staff, we've got to focus on the substitutes, and that pipeline of growing our own leaders and getting other educators into our district from outside. So that's that first bullet. The second one that I think is important is that equity across departments and for all students and families. We've got to serve kids, and we've got to train staff and kids. We have had the blessing of incredible equity leadership in this district with Dr. Price being the equity director. But I know you know, but maybe not everybody does, that she had 2 jobs. She's so good that we just piled more on her and gave her more responsibilities. That's what happens when you're good at what you do. And so she was doing secondary hiring and so on in the HR department and the equity department leader. I think it's probably time for us to talk about an equity department that has its own team and such. I know we've had a model like that in the past. We may need to get back to that. In addition to that, our equity leader just was promoted to a new position that she's doing very well, but has her focus on some other things. And so that's another area I would talk about. The third bullet down is I continue to hear that we can do more to develop that cycle of assessment, curriculum, and instruction. If you think about it, where do you start with that cycle? Well, probably curriculum and instruction somehow or another, some blend of this. You're going to decide what you're going to teach, what materials you may use, and then of course what may be most important, how are you going to teach that? What instruction will you use? When you're done with that, what's really important to do is to assess the learner and use that assessment then as a diagnosis. This is, Dr. Ronner ought to be here. I just said diagnosis. To diagnose the needs for the future so that we can prescribe through curriculum and instruction. And I continually heard that we can do even better here. I do not mean to disparage a single person or anyone in our Department of Assessment and Evaluation. They are wonderful. They do a great job for us. They do way more than just assessment. But this is an area where I think we can do more partnership with the curriculum and instruction department. And again, I'm simply throwing out a concept. I think context will have to come with their involvement. Positive behavior for students and the supports that go with that, I think, are going to be a focus of this. And it's going to take some energy, some effort, some positions. It'll cost some money to put more structure in so that we're providing systems district-wide. You know, think about that mobile population that I talked to you about. When they move from this building to that building, sometimes they're learning a whole new system for student behavior expectations and supports. We probably are going to have to create a little more consistency district-wide there, and I think that's going to take some leadership to do so. And then the last item is that talent pipeline, growing our own, bringing others into this district. It's probably could have been put up in that human resources bullet as well, but it was spoken about often enough that I wanted to call it out separately here. So you asked me for some feedback of, you know, what are those areas where you'd probably look to make some changes or improvements or additions? And I would say conceptually only, here are some of those areas. And we'll have our team members help build context if that's something we can agree to when we get later in the school year moving forward. And so then I get to the comments and feedback slide, and once again remind you that I'll do my best to answer questions if you have them, but more likely we'll take your questions if you have them and make sure that we're getting you the information you need following this presentation. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll come back up to my seat if that's acceptable.
Please.
Yep.
Questions or feedback for Dr. Gossman?
Well,
Smoker?
I feel we should, but at the moment, it's like, this is a very highly comprehensive perspective, so it's a lot to take in. I mean, definitely, we've had a chance to kind of semi-look at it.
Yeah.
But I just really appreciate you actually putting that effort into it, and I also want to thank the community for everyone who got phone calls to say, hey, would you meet with you, would be, you know, give them our thanks, because we asked them to do that before we hired you.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, we've gone back to the community several times to say, what are we looking for? And then also like, well, now we have that person and so forth. So I kind of would hope that a lot of this also will also continue to take us towards the creation of our strategic planning. I mean, it's like a lot of really good pillar points for that as well. So thank you for being so comprehensive about a mid-time.
Thanks, Annie. Ms. Byer?
It's a very comprehensive report, and as Annie said, it's a lot to digest. It's also, you know, bubbling up some ideas for me, but I think I want them to coalesce a little bit before I start to express them. But it's a good beginning point, and I do think it's a good beginning strategy for our strategic planning that we'll be doing. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Barbara. Other comments or feedback? I've got just a couple of quick comments. First, as board chair, I've been privy to some of this work and some of the conversation. Dr. Gossman has shared it with me or given me updates. And it looks to me, Paul, like you are putting on a clinic for learning not only a system, but also a community. And of course, this was a return home for you, so maybe you had a leg up there, but still talking to the right people, collecting relevant data for us. This is not a question right now, but just to share with you some thinking that's on my mind. When you're talking about HR and the need for more supports, I agree with that completely. One of the things that I have been wondering about is the fact that our student population, it's flattened the last couple of years, but for many years we were experiencing huge record-setting growth. And my memory is that the number and the type of positions that we have in HR have been relatively consistent over that time.
That's correct.
So I would expect that, I would hope that part of your analysis and eventual recommendations would talk about appropriate staffing, not only in that department, but everywhere. HR is something that's on my mind, obviously, lately. But just so that you have in mind one of the things that I've been thinking about, and I'll be looking for more information when you bring your final report.
Sure.
Very good.
If I might add just one more thing, because I should have said it earlier, I had a lot of help from the exec team in putting this report together in this format, especially Sarah Salem, and I just want to say thank you because they're, as you know, incredible.
Great. Thank you.